So today's class, we are going to be talking about arrays. What is an array? Arrays are special variables that can hold more than one value. How do you define array? The same way you name your variable, you can name an array. So let's say we want to make a list of cars. To define an array, you start with the square bracket. This is an empty array. Like this is enough for an empty array. And I told us that it can hold multiple values. Instead of doing something like variable car1 equals to Volvo, car2 equals to Toyota. With this array, we can list these two values in one variable called cars. So to do that, you bring in your Volvo here, and to put multiple, you separate it with comma, and you can put your Toyota here. So this is individual variable that holding one single car, or to hold multiple cars, list of cars, you can make this special variable that contains both. How to reference the value of a variable? You do the same way you reference your identifier for individual variables. You reference the cars, which is the name of the list or the name of the array, followed by a square bracket, and you access the individual values with the index number. So the first one is 0, the second one is 1, and so forth. So if we do this, we will get Volvo. And if we put 1 here, we will get Toyota. So this is how you can define a list, which is arrays. And this is how you can access the values. Arrays can contain mixed values. It's not only when you're putting a string, you put only string, no? You can also put mix of numbers, and you can mix even Boolean or even decimals. Your array can contain all the data types that we've discussed, including function. You can also put a function in an array. So to access this value, the same, you increase the index and it will return you 34. If I increase the index, the more, it will return the next one, which is 0. This is the last one. The Boolean is on 3. And if I run this, you get true. So your arrays can contain all the data types that we've discussed, including itself, another array. So example of that is, let's say we have a list of companies that deals with a car, list of companies that deals with car. and each company can have multiple different cars. So let's say company 1 deals with Toyota and Volvo, and company 2 is dealing with Golf and maybe Corolla. So this is how you see here. This is a list. Whenever you see this square bracket, this is a list. And you see that here we have another square bracket inside here. So this is another list. And this is another list. So we have a list that contains 2 lists. And this list contains other 2 items. So if you want to access this multiple list like this, you can do the same way. Companies, if you want to access the first list, you put index 0. When you run this, you get the whole list. Let me comment this. When you run this, you get the whole list. You see, the first list, which has Toyota and Volvo. Now, if you want to access the individual item in the list, you have to put another square bracket in the front and put the index of the element you want to access. So when I run this now, you get Toyota. If we want to access the Volvo, we put 1 here. And when you run this, you get Volvo. If you want to access the second index, you have to increase the first one, which is the second list. And this one will give us Corolla. Your arrays are always accessed with index numbers. So if you want to make an array that you can access with named properties, you can do the same, but it will become an object. Remember when we deal with the object, say individual car, which is an object, we can give it the name Volvo and the color black. This is an object. You can do the same with an array. You can do exactly this with an array. Say car equals to an array, and you can't do this within in here. You have to assign them individually. So I did mention here already how you can change the value of an array. So you can, the same way you access an array, you can also change the value using the same accessor. So let's say we want to change this Volvo to some other name. We can access it using the index, then use the equal to, which is the assignment operator, and we can change the name to Golf. If we print this list now, print cars, you will see that the first list, the first item there is now Golf, and Volvo has been taken away. So this is how you can change a value of an array. The same way you change the value of an array, you can also use it to assign a value of an array. So for example, this car, if we want to assign the first in the list, we can say car 0 equals to Fiat. If we do console.log car, you will see that it has one item. See here, Fiat. So you can do the same. As many items you want to assign, you can list them out like this. So if I run this again, you'll see each of the items are assigned into their specific position. Now, what I wanted to use this to teach us is that you can also use named keys. Say in this case, you want to call it a specific name. So let's say the name of the car is Fiat, and we want to set the color to black. This will work, but it will convert this list to an object. So you see here, it's still a list, but no longer, it's called an associative array. When you define things like this, it's called associative array. So which means if you want to access this car name, you have to access it this way. And when you run this, you get the name. And if you want to get the color, you put in the color and you can get the color. So this works exactly as an object. So if you do .color, you will get black, the same. So this one, we convert it to an object. Now, when you do console log this, you see here, you still get something like a list, which is a square bracket, instead of an object, which is curly bracket. So let us check something for you to understand what's going on there. So let's say this one is the car object. This is car object. This is car array, right? So let's print both side by side. And you see the difference. You see, this one is an associative array that have the name and the value. This one is an object that have the property and the value, right? So, but the behavior of list, in a list, we have some methods that are associated to a list. Just like we have string method and number method that we treated the previous classes. This array also have its own method. So when you define your array like this, some of those methods no longer applies. So something like, if you want to get the total length of your list, all you have to do is do cars.length. This is a property of an array. So if you run this, it will give you the total, which is 5. But when you define your array as an associative array with names like this, you can no longer get .length anymore from the object. So if I run this now, if I run this, you see, it gives you 0. but the item is not 0. So take note of this when you are defining your array to be an associative array. Instead of defining associative array, just use an object. Just use an object like this so that you know that it is an object. So your array is always indexed. So this is associative array. Use objects instead. So I'm just going to leave this here for your reference. All right, so we have an object here called car. This is our car object. I told you our list can contain several data types. So we can also make a list of cars consts cars objects, and we can make this list of car. So let's say this is car 1, and we have another car. We have car 2, that is Toyota, and this one is white. So you can make your list, a list of cars like this. Car 1 and car 2. So remember, this is an object. This is an object. So it's a list of an object. So if we do console log car object, you'll see car 1 already exists. So we have, okay, we have this variable here. So let's take that out. And we run that. You see here, this is an object. Then see the separating comma, and this is another object. So the same way you access your list, you can also access this one. To access the first car, that is in index 0. Then when you print this, you see that it returns the first car object. Now, from this place, if you want to access the name, you have to access it like an object because this is an object. So you have to access it with .name or square bracket with the parentheses name. So can access this one as an associative array. So if I run this, you get Volvo. So it's either this way or this way, .name. The same way you used to access your objects, you get Volvo, the same. So you can create an array and you can assign them with multiple elements. That is understood. Okay. Now, you can also define arrays with an object, an array object using the new keyword. So if you say books equals to new array, you can also define your array like this. And you can put the list of your books here. Book A, book B, book C, like this. And when you console log books, you get the whole list the same way. You see, See it here, still with the curly bracket. So this is for you to know that they are there, but mostly in your programming life, you would favor this square bracket because there's no need for these extra words. They do the same. Even this using square bracket is faster compared to this one. So you can also access the values the same way using index. So if you run this, you get A. So know that this exists, but favor the square bracket. Remember when we were doing type of, when you see an array like this, and you do type of array, type of an array variable is going to return you an object. It's going to return you an object. So how do you recognize that a variable is actually an array and not object like type of says it is? Now, there is ways that you can use to check. You can either check using instance of. So you can say, is car object instance of array? So if it is an array, this statement will return true. If this is not an array, it will return false. So if you run this, you see that it is true. So this is one way of checking if a variable is an array. Since type of returns an object, you won't be able to know with this method. But if you check if the instance is an array, then it will return true. That will tell you that this variable is an array. You can also check if a variable is an array by using an array method called isArray. IsArray takes the object that you want to check. So if you run this, it's going to also return true. So if we pass it, for example, you know this is an object. If we pass it this car2, this will return false because it is not an array. This is how to recognize an array. When you are programming, you want to know that a variable is actually an array and not an object. You use these two formats. Task 12, define 5 lists of fruits. Define a list of stores containing a list of fruits. Output the length of the list. Use instance to verify if a list is an array.